Ready when you are.
Keys, PCs, and DVDs. All on this week's eye-popping installment of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's long but undeniably hot, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, the 10th Doctor's gone straight to video, leaving Martha to bring home the bacon, while some people on the internet spend their time dissecting a script line by line. What a bunch of nerds. We pour ourselves a 1am coffee and refuse to take our eyes off Blink. Hello, John.
Matt, how's it going?
I was going to say I'm very well. It is going well.
It sort of is.
As am
so
I.
far, so good.
As am I.
Yeah.
As am I. It is wonderful to be back behind the microphone with you.
Well, I've been locked in a cupboard since the last time we were recording this podcast, so it's nice to get a breath of fresh air.
Absolutely. And hello, listeners. It's been a while, but we're back. We're turning the engines on. We're going to aim to bring this experience to you weekly.
Yeah.
So plenty more Doctor Who content for your ears and for your eyes, because we have video now. We're on YouTube.
I just did a little wave for the camera.
Ah, lovely. That'll probably be the most visually dynamic thing that happens this evening.
I would imagine, yes.
Although, otherwise we will just be sitting here watching.
Before we
each other
kick off,
talk about Doctor Who.
Before we kick off, I did want to say how proud I am of the Between Two Ferns coded setup you've given us here, and I very much like the sort of open university 70s kind of after dark intellectual kind of vibe that you've given us.
I think if we
which won't be matched by what we're talking by what we say, unfortunately.
It's very much the vibe. I think if A, either of us smoked, and B, we weren't sitting in my house, we would be smoking right now. But sadly, that's not going to happen.
Mr. Needer, in your latest work, you talk about the obsequious necessity of comfort. Perhaps you could go into more, that kind of thing. Yeah. That's the kind of level of chat that the decor suggests you'll get, but alas, not from us.
We're going to be
tonight.
Talking about Doctor Who.
Yes.
And it's been about a year since we last got behind the mic, and quite a lot's happened in the world of Doctor Who since then. Obviously, the 14th...
And the world.
And the world, but, we're not here to talk about that.
No.
The 14th Doctor came and went. 15th Doctor, we're one series down. We'll be getting to the current era of the show probably slightly sooner than we might have done under our previous format. We'll be talking about that in due course. There's also an official Doctor Who podcast now. And I think it's a bit rough that we didn't get the nod.
Absolutely, yeah. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Can you imagine if this was an official Disney-branded product?
Well,
we'd have more money to play with than this setup, anyway.
Yeah, there'd be some sort of lava lamp visual thing behind us.
We could have at least sprung for a green screen. But anyway,
we could.
Anyway, it is what it is. We're here to do what we normally do, which is talk about Doctor Who.
Let us entertain you.
And
we're only talking about one episode or one story.
We're only talking about one story. But what a story, at least in terms of reputation.
So go on.
Now, this is interesting. So in planning this return run of I'll Explain Later, I basically took all of the stories that we've not reviewed yet and stuck them into a spreadsheet, genuinely randomized them, and then, tweak for taste, as per, doing Christmas episodes at Christmas and that kind of thing. It genuinely brought Blink out first. This is not coming from any plan to sort of relaunch the show with a big cheese, but interestingly, we're kicking off with what through some lenses might be one of the most consequential episodes of the modern series,
and most loved.
Certainly one of the most influential. Yeah, and yes, absolutely, an episode that in all of the polling, very much sits at the top table with, Genesis of the Daleks, Talent of Wang Chiang, Caves of Androzani, all the classics of Doctor Who. But we hold no truck with that kind of conventional wisdom and polling.
Well, Moffat's, because obviously this was written famously. I mean, like, if you know one thing about it, this was written by Stephen Moffat, and it's
was it
almost as a kind of calling card. But I mean, obviously, people had very much enjoyed the work that he'd done prior to this. So Blink was obviously season 3 of New Who, broadcast on the 9th of June 2007. And obviously, as I say, people had enjoyed the prior work that he'd done on the show, but this was, I feel, when the momentum really began. Like, when Russell T Davies goes, it's got to be this guy. I mean, that seems to be self-evident. So I guess we'll dig into the legacy of Blink a bit later on. We should talk about the episode on its own merits, right?
Should we say what happens in Blink? Do you want to summarise this, or shall I have a go?
No, it's always more entertaining when I do it.
Fair enough, when you stumble your way through it.
A young lady in a creepy house, because she likes creepy things, discovers some hidden messages behind the wallpaper which seem to be addressed directly at her, which is a real shock, as you might imagine. And then she comes across these marauding, time-eating aliens, the Weeping Angels, who are sort of chasing her down and zooming some of her friends and those she meets back into the past. And it's all very confusing, and the Doctor and Martha Jones seem to sneak into the background of the episode by playing on various televisions, and then it turns out that there's a DVD Easter egg, which is a concept we might need to explain to some of our younger listeners. But either one of them. So a lot of kind of timey-wimey stuff ensues, and Sally Sparrow has to help the Doctor get back from the past and rescue the TARDIS from the Weeping Angels and deal with the fallout and consequences of all of her friends disappearing into the ether, basically. Yeah.
That's as pretty much a good a summary as I could manage. Single episode, 45 minutes, as we've said, held in incredibly high esteem. John, do you like Blink?
Yes. And I liked it more than ever watching it back this time. As you might imagine, I've seen Blink many times. Yeah. Many times. But I hadn't seen it for a while. And I fully expected to be relatively bored watching it, not because of its inherent qualities or lack thereof or anything, but just because I've seen it so many times that I thought, like, am I going to find new and interesting things to think about this or say about this? And I was struck that I was almost watching it for the first time fresh again. Yeah. And saw so much in it that I had never seen before. Because I think, again, we will come a bit more onto the legacy of this later on. This obviously was a big, when I describe it as almost like the calling card, the puzzle box stuff, the meta narratives, the use of sort of postmodern references, and the joke about Sparrow and Nightingale being very ITV.
Yeah, I got that.
Which obviously is a riff off Rosemary and Time, which was actually on ITV around about that moment in time. Although winningly, of course, at the end, they do actually call the shop Sparrow and Nightingale. Yeah. Antiquarian books and rare DVDs. Rare, not your common garden DVDs, rare DVDs. But yeah, so...
the real sick stuff.
Yeah. So this is his calling card, especially around that, as I say, puzzle box and a lot of what we have termed sometimes giving major props, sometimes rather disparagingly, as Moffat's box of tricks, is very clear here, and it's
this is the box.
The tricks are flying out of it. Yeah. What I think made this such a fresh watch for me was I realised actually this episode is not about any of that at all. That is there for you as a sci-fi fan, and you can watch it and enjoy it, but And I think this is perhaps where some of Moffat's later stuff does fall down. This is all about humanity and seizing the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the Weeping Angels literally seize your moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
But there are so many callbacks to, for a start, like when her friend and then later the police officer are zipped back into the past, as the Doctor says, they kill you kindly, right? Or, it's not actually the end of their lives. They go on to have extremely fulfilling lives.
Rich lives, yeah.
It's almost like it's a sliding doors moment for them rather than it being something really terrible. And obviously, if we were to go, if you were to make an extended,
Something potentially traumatizing.
well,
but
of
it's
course,
not.
but it doesn't. But it's not about that.
It's not death.
It's absolutely not about that.
No, it's not.
And as a piece of art, it's saying, look, just go with us, right? Yeah. Obviously, her brother should really be distraught and in bits, and we could do 3 episodes around that. But that's not what this is about. She gets taken from that moment and put somewhere else, and she makes the most of that moment and lives in that moment. She doesn't spend the rest of her life moaning about what could have been in 2007. The part where brilliantly when there's the kind of interplay with the script and then realizing that Sally is speaking the other half of the conversation, and of course the Doctor says, "Look to the left," and there's the wonderful joke. I think that's a political statement. But of course, right at the end, when she does actually finally meet the Doctor and give him the kind of dossier, she again looks to her left, and sees what's his face, the brother whose name I can't remember.
What is he called? Lawrence.
Yeah. Larry, Lawrence. But I think both.
Yeah.
Anyway, Larry, something. Anyway, him. She looks to her left and holds his hand, and I won't lie, a little tear came into my eye. It was really romantic and lovely. But this is about, you must seize the day. You must live in this moment wherever you are, whatever your opportunities are. You must grab those moments, and it's very affecting, I found, as a parent. I've got a 6-year-old daughter, to watch this, because you do feel the cogs of time turning, that you go from being a younger person to being a middle-aged person to becoming a parent, seeing somebody else entering their youth.
Absolutely.
And you think about the stages of man, like William Shakespeare's stages of man, and you sort of find yourself thinking about what time means in terms of the stages of your life and the necessity to seize the day and live in that moment. And like the Weeping Angels, they literally seize you. They seize your moment.
Yeah,
you've got to do the same. You've got to seize the moment. It felt to me a beautiful celebration of what it is to be a human who lives in the moment. And I thought it was deeply romantic. It hangs very much on whether you care about Sally Sparrow, and of course, Carey Mulligan goes on to, I think, other things.
1 or 2.
And she, it lives or dies basically on that performance. I think the whole thing is, by the way, beautifully cast throughout.
Yeah.
But I think that obviously it lives or dies on that central casting, and she's fantastic. But I want to give Moffat the credit for creating a script and characters where, I mean, it's just that wonderful thing of Moffat being in Russell T Davies' era. It feels imbued with the Russell T Davies focus on character. And I know that he says he never touched Moffat's scripts, and I'm sure that's true, but it nonetheless feels like, well, this is Russell's season, I've got to bring that side of it. But he's got his puzzle box element there, and it's all wrapped up. And I love the bit at the end where Lawrence says, some things are just never left resolved. And I couldn't help but think about season 5 or season 6.
I noted that. So he says some things you never find out. And that's okay. And she replies, "No, it isn't."
No, it isn't. Which
I thought was an interesting.
She speaks for us all.
Yeah.
How did the TARDIS?
But 2 years later,
exactly. But no, I just loved this, and I saw it through a completely fresh set of eyes almost. I've wanged on long enough. This is where you usually say, "Oh, I hated this."
Yeah. No, this is really interesting, actually. I had a similar reaction to you. I absolutely loved it this time round. I went into it feeling, I mean, I've seen it loads before. I went into it feeling at least thinking that I was fairly familiar with it. And also being very familiar with the sort of mechanics of it. And as I say, like we will come on to talking about like the legacy of this story, which I think is consequential.
Profound, yeah, for the show.
But yeah, no, it was the as a story, it is all like the primary attraction is the engineering of it, and the engineering is absolutely magnificent. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, it's the puzzle box narrative. Yes, there are, it's the clues. It's the non-linear approach to storytelling, basically, which is, Moffat, as I think, British TV drama's most successful postmodernist, maybe, that's kind of his calling card. But the engineering is absolutely faultless, and there is a real thrill to the pieces falling into the place where you're, as the viewer is working it out maybe 30 seconds ahead of the characters in there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't lead to a sort of frustration that maybe like the characters are dumb and you wish they'd sort of catch up. It's actually like there's a real excitement of you going,
I mean, that's literally reference. Why do they never just go to the police?
I've completely forgot about that line.
That's so good.
That character who only gets a couple of lines, was it Banto, who runs the DVD shop?
Just that little held moment where when Sally Sparrow walks into the shop and he just holds up his finger so that she waits until a particular moment and then he allows her to speak.
Yeah.
Very well observed arsehole
100%.
Who would work in that kind of shop.
100%. So, the engineering is faultless. As I say, the thrill as it falls into place. There's that bit where she and Larry are watching the DVD in the house and she realises that she is somehow able to have this kind of conversation with the doctor. And then Larry says, I'm going to write this down, get your half of the conversation. And like, before they work it out, you go like, oh, I see how this is working. And it's so exciting to see that sort of unfold. So there's a real sort of visceral thrill for the viewer to see all the pieces.
Just, I can't get over how beautifully, you talked about the engineering, and the engineering, this is like, beautiful welds, the kind of welds you see on a Brompton bicycle, just absolutely beautifully engineered. When they're doing that bit and you think, well, how can he be writing it fast enough? No, there's an answer for that. He's writing in shorthand. But also they use that as a little character moment. You write shorthand. As if like, you nerd.
Yeah.
But it's a little moment between them that kind of builds up the credibility of their later romance. I mean, you get nothing between them really in terms of like time spent, but you believe that point where she reaches for his hand at the end. It's so sweet.
Well, it sort of comes, and that's the other thing that I think really came through sort of watching it this time around.
And she literally seizes the moment because she grabs his hand, right?
But was that sort of more emotional dimension to it. And that was one of the scenes that stood out, I think. And I think that is really where getting a top tier actress like Carey Mulligan is where you sort of hit pay dirt. But her sort of itchy frustration at not being able to sort of get the final piece of how the doctor came across this information, like where their paths would cross again, to fall into place. She has a kind of twitchy discomfort when she's in the shop. Larry's going out to get milk. And then the scene with the doctor is so short and she realises that all she has to do is hand him the folder.
Yeah.
The sense of closure that she manages to convey in that is absolutely remarkable. And then, because the
kind of closure that Moffat didn't really offer us 2 seasons later.
He can do it once. It's that sort of, and obviously it's really funny that they say there's that kind of, I've got to go, and the doctor and Martha are carrying the bows and arrows. And
all the gobbledygook they're saying.
Gobbledygook that they're saying, like, Doctor, what was it that the hatching is starting?
Yeah, like
something like that.
To Red Terminal or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he says, look, I've got to go. I've got something else on. And she just goes, yeah, of course. Because it's like just the relief that she is able to convey of getting that final piece to fall into place. And then, she's ready to seize the moment, as you say. It's like it's a lovely moment.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really hit me this time round was the sequence with, well, first of all, the younger Billy and then the older Billy.
Yeah. Billy Shipton.
Billy Shipton.
D.I.
yes.
Billy Shipton.
D.I. Billy Shipton, who is the...
Later king of the DVD.
So he is the police officer who she meets, who's already been investigating a lot of the weird goings on at the haunted house.
Wester Drumlins.
Yeah. And he's that back in time, and then she meets him, like literally the next thing she does in terms of the story is meet him as an old man, and he fills in the story. And all three of the performers, so obviously Mulligan again, but also the guy playing the younger Billy and the guy playing the older Billy. And those two guys are very well cast, that it doesn't feel like, there are plenty of situations where, you get someone else and they feel like a completely different person.
Yeah.
But those two actors do a really good job of being the same guy at different points in their life. But that scene really walks a real high wire act, because it has to simultaneously convey this sense that maybe they do have a really deep, profound connection that in Billy's case, lasts decades of his life, like most of his life. And yet they have only just met, moments earlier in her timeline. And there's something, I think at that point, she's sort of seen enough to go with it. But the performances and the writing really, really land that.
Yeah,
which is remarkable.
The slip of the tongue where she says her name is Sally Shipton.
Yeah.
Is a very clever piece of writing, because obviously it's sort of goofball rom-com stuff, and it just works on its own level. But it's also a piece of shorthand that could have been her name. That actually it's meant to be. Go with
do you know what, the sliding doors thing?
Yeah,
I'd never thought of sliding doors actually as being an influence on this, but that actually
100%.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know whether it was conscious, but it's there.
Yeah.
But like that, you are meant. What he's saying with that is, you have to buy the idea that actually, if she had gone for that drink, been able to go for that drink with him, her path would have taken an entirely different direction.
Yeah.
And that there are actually many paths open to us as a result. So you've got to seize the day. But if one door closes, you have agency in your life. If you can open your eyes to the warmth and the compassion and the love and the opportunities around you, you can take because it actually nothing is set in stone in the sense of it being there only being one pathway for you.
Yeah. And you're right that it's shrewd and sort of moving as well to give these people sort of rich lives, and the fact that he goes from, and again it's just seeded so beautifully about how he goes from being the police officer to I got into the video business later DVD and became the king of the DVD, and then you go like, once again, I see where this is going. It's so exciting.
Publishing, then video publishing, then DVD. And it's just it's a lovely reveal. But also just the pictures, both of her friend, I think Kathy, is it?
Yes.
Who gets zapped back, and obviously Billy. The pictures of their weddings, their
happy
children,
lives.
their happy lives. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to have the big bad, the weeping angel, send them back, and then they end up, I don't know, dying in the First World War or something like that, right? But that's not what Moffat decided to do. He decided to show us something else, to show us something about the lack of limits in human possibility. It's a very uplifting story, actually. Even the people who bad things happen to, everybody lives.
Yeah.
It's basically everybody lives, right? They get this opportunity to live a different life, and they seize their moments.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Going back again to, Billy Shipton, the scene in the hospital, I mean, it got me.
Yeah,
I went.
Yeah.
And the whole callback to, because life is short and you are hot. Life is long and you are hot.
Yeah.
And this, the first time it's all about you are hot. And the second time it's all about life is long.
Yes.
And it's again, just perhaps it's me getting older, but it just makes you really think about what the sweep of life is.
Yeah. But also, and this is another one where it's like the jokes land.
Yeah, no, it's so funny.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
And it's like I'd forgotten what a funny script it is. I mean, yes, it's the Sparrow Nightingale. It's all a bit ITV. I mean, even there's the referential stuff where it says, where Billy says that it looks like a police box, but actually the windows are the wrong size, which was obviously the first
wonderful in-joke for Who fans.
Yeah, the Who fans who complained that the TARDIS windows were the wrong size when the first images of the new series filming were sort of leaked in the press. I mean, even down to the sort of meta level of like, the Doctor only really exists in this story on DVD, which for years, obviously, the Doctor only had existed on DVD in terms of being as a going concern.
Yeah,
the Doctor as a sort of feature, and if you want to go really far, on something shot in film in the 60s and then later transferred to DVD.
Yeah, that feels very on the nose, doesn't it?
It feels extremely on the nose, and and I suppose it sort of speaks to that thing of like. And Moffat leans into this later a bit in Doctor Who, and I think he leans into it quite hard in Sherlock, that, he is obviously fascinated by this idea of...
To diminishing returns. Sorry, did I say that out loud?
No, I mean, we'll come on to the legacy. But, that one of the things that is in his box of tricks, maybe not the thing he pulls out all the time, but an awareness, I think, that his characters have, that they are characters in a television story, which...
Speaking of whipping out his box of tricks, when, of course, Sally first sees Larry and he's in the complete nuddy nude, that feels like a bit of a cheap shot at first, and it seems like a bit of a callback to the Rhys Ifans character in Notting Hill.
Yeah, who he's clearly styled on. Yeah,
complete, 100%.
Yeah.
But... Obviously in Nottingham, good choice of briefs, I'd say. Whereas, of course, in this one, he's got no underpants on at all. But actually, what I found, I thought, it's cheap, but I'll go with it. But it's all about referencing it later when she sees him, and he can't quite place her because it was like 1 o'clock in the morning and he was a bit groggy. We've met. It'll come to you. Oh, God. There it is. There it is. And there's a lovely, and just want to pay tribute to the director Hetty MacDonald. There's a wonderful there it is. It's a really good close up. It's a proper like cut to close up. There it is. It's just and Kerry Mulligan really loves. You can see her really enjoying the mischief of getting the opportunity to remind him of that.
Yeah, she's having an absolute hoot throughout this. Glad that you mentioned the direction as well, because that is absolutely faultless in this.
I completely agree.
At a point where, like, I think this season has got some terrific direction in it, and some direction. Well, I don't want to say it's terrible.
Run of the mill,
or stuff that hasn't sort of aged so well. But
Pebble Mill, if you will.
Yeah. This, even though it's still in the early days, it's still being shot on digital tape. In standard definition. It looks really good. I mean, also, all of the decisions that they make in the edit, like how, and it's one of the things where like everyone is really working a shift in order to get this to work. But how economically the setup is established early on, where first of all, it's layering in mysteries from the get-go. There's the wallpaper in the pre-credit sequence. There's the video on the screen.
Where the writing's literally on the wall.
Yeah. There's Kathy's disappearance in the third scene. It's like it doles out its mysteries quickly. It doesn't waste any time to get to the story. But then when Kathy gets zapped back in time, the time split is realised brilliantly, of Sally reading the letter and it intercutting between Kathy finding herself in that situation in the first place. And it's like, again...
Probably the most references to Hull in a single episode of Doctor Who. I mean, he really minds the repetition of Hull as a piece of comedy, and it really works.
But in a way, it's so economical in the sort of, you understand what's happened to her, you understand what that is as an engine of the plot, and you get this kind of sweep of her life. Especially with the slightly haunted-looking grandson who turns up in order to deliver.
It's going to kill me. I can't remember the actor's name, but he's very well cast. I think I think he's in the very first episode of Midsummer Murders
Yeah.
as a creepy undertaker, and I suspect, yeah, him,
Yeah.
because he is a bit creepy, isn't he?
But also, I mean, in like classic Doctor Who tradition, it mines maximum menace. And I think, maybe go on to talk about the Angels a little bit, which,
Yeah,
the nominal villains of this.
Yeah.
Which, are genuinely creepy as all hell. But I think also more so for some of the distinctions and decisions they have to make around budget, which is literally, you don't see them move. They're statues. It's like the camera cuts away, it cuts back, and it's moved a little bit. That's sort of almost like it's not even as painstaking as stop motion. It's like it's sort of such an easy thing to do. But all of the cut tos are paced through the direction and through the editing so brilliantly, so that like when you actually get that sense of like, oh my god, it's moved.
Well, through to that final scare with them being chased as they try desperately to get into the TARDIS, and it's just those flickering, and it's almost like the very, very early sort of 1900s daguerreotype flickering images, early cinema kind of
really low frame rate,
really low frame rate sort of stuff, which kind of calls back to the kind of old school scares you get from silent horror. Just wonderful. Cheap, I suppose, by television standards of that type, but just fantastic work. Really scary. The jumps are brilliant.
Yeah, and you can sort of see why they caught they caught the public imagination so successfully. I think in a way that like no other modern series monster has. It's really remarkable and just really efficient how well they do all that.
And of course they broke out, didn't they? I mean, they really, when we saw them again and again.
Yeah, they were the ones. Well, okay. So look, let's. We've been teasing.
Okay, before we go on to the wider implications of it, I just wanted to say that despite Carey Mulligan being so mesmerizing in this and so beautifully cast and delivering such light and shade, in the two live sequences and the sequence on the video, Tennant steals it.
Yeah, he's
every
great.
time he's on the screen.
He's got it dialed in at this point.
Oh,
absolutely. Which
it's brilliant.
I find the previous season, where he's sort of visibly finding his feet, the performance can be very up and down. But like he really understands it. He really gets that warmth, but also the sort of the craziness. It's the craziness without the feeling like mannered or.
Well, of course, it's not pretty when they blow.
Yeah,
that's very funny.
That's a very funny
the
line
chicken
with the
joke.
Hens. Yeah.
But he goes from that line to, and I'm sorry, Billy.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
He manages to go from really stupid humor to really quite severe, and also he's very arrogant and selfish. Like at no point does he go, well, I got a time machine, I'll probably just pop back and deal with all
these. Move you around. Yeah.
No, you get to wait 40 odd years or 35, 40 years to deliver this message so I can get my TARDIS back. Best of luck with that. I mean, it's something that Tennant, I think, delivers perfectly, is this tightrope of being very charming and moral, but being almost so bound up in his own righteousness that he can't really see what he's asking other people to do.
Absolutely. And to be honest, you could extend that further and say that, obviously in terms of the role that this is playing in the season, this is like the Dr. Light episode that, in season 2, it's Love and Monsters. Season 3, it was this. Season 4, you got Turn Left. And, these are episodes that mean that you could schedule in a break for the lead actor. It's really interesting to sort of think, and of all of the things that we've sort of praised it for in terms of like the sort of complexity of its story, the emotional richness that it has for sort of all the characters involved. From the Doctor's point of view, this is presumably a very minor event for him in terms of the fact that he's obviously he's. At some point he loses the TARDIS and gets zapped back in time by the Angels. He wants to get it back. he realizes that a few years earlier a woman's given him a transcript, so he reads it to DVD, gives a couple of messages, and just waits for it to sort itself out. I mean, it's like, as an adventure for the Doctor, this is a very, very minor entry. But you're right in terms of what that sort of says about the ripples and the consequences that all of that has for everyone else, for all of the people that he leaves behind.
This is not new territory for Doctor Who, I just want to be clear.
No.
I mean, I think back to the review that we did of the Sunmakers, Tom Baker serial. Obviously, and by the way, an excellent black...
Do you mean The Face of Evil?
No, I mean the Sunmakers.
Okay, because I was going to say The Face of Evil as well, in terms of like the statue of him as a god, his face on the mountain.
No, I was thinking about him basically fomenting a Marxist-Leninist revolution and then saying, well, good luck with that, and then buggering off at the end.
All the best.
I do want to say, Lewis Baston, big friend of this podcast, whose book Borderlands is available now, also wrote a fantastic book for Black Archive on Sunmakers. I like to think in part influenced by having listened to our review of it. But
if we're going to have had influence on any of his books, it'll be the Sunmaker's book rather than Borderlands, right?
Indeed. But I think that it's of a piece with that sort of like, well, I mean, it's a bit more, he has a bit more agency in Sunmakers in the sense that he foments the revolution sort of to help himself a little bit as well, and then buggers off and leaves him to, well, you'll be fine.
But it's also, I mean, it's the same basic idea as Love and Monsters, which is to sort of tell the story of the other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And indeed specifically fandom, because obviously Larry represents fandom very...
Always on the internet.
Yes. You mean
has
the
a big
internet?
DVD clip. Well, it's that live. What do you mean you've only got 17 DVDs?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, it's funny, it's smart, but I found it. But I think what I wasn't expecting was to find it very moving.
Yeah,
and I did find it very moving, and I would really encourage anyone who has enjoyed it primarily through that prism of it being a perfect puzzle box, and it absolutely is that.
Absolutely,
and
is.
It's fine to enjoy it in that level. And by the way, the really sweet, just let's make all children frightened of all statues ever.
It's a real kicker, right
cut at the end.
Yeah.
I love that. And of course, it's that.
It's a real kick in the balls for any nervous parents out there, right?
No. But you see, the thing is, I think that what Moffat has done there is, and I think this is perhaps where we're going to talk about the legacy. But he's created a monster that actually had a kind of behind the sofa, scary kind of moment, and actually scaring those kids to a certain point within the framework of this being Doctor Who is something delicious.
It should be doing as well.
But obviously with that in mind, but just the fact that it was such a moving experience to watch, really, I would encourage people to go back and look at it for that as well.
Yeah.
But you wanted to talk about the legacy of this, and obviously we just talked about the Weeping Angels and the fact that they kind of had that breakout moment as the kind of villains. But I think when primarily Who fandom speaks about Blink's impact, they primarily think about the box of tricks, the layering of complex plot, the suppression of knowledge later revealed or not.
And it's fair to say that so many elements of this are strip mined in later series to... Well,
diminishing returns.
Bluntly, diminishing returns. I'm not even going to say something myself, because I think that's what we've said, is that, I mean, even to the extent that looking at the preview clips of the Christmas special for this year, which has been written by Stephen Moffat, and obviously they've released the pre-credit sequence already, and it feels very much of a piece with a lot of the sort of trickery of like the different time zones that we're seeing here. I mean, one thing I hadn't noticed this time around at the end when Sally sees the Doctor in the flesh in the final scene, and then she says, "It's really you. You don't remember me. We haven't met yet," which is exactly what the exchange that he has with River Song the following year in Silence in the Library. I think I think there's two things. I mean, I think it's like there's, on the one hand, there is the fact that Moffat, I think, likes to revisit his themes and mechanics, bluntly. And there are this is where he absolutely nails it, and he never lands it this coherently and succinctly again. I think on its own terms.
Yeah, I don't think he lands that version of himself.
No.
And I think that actually his later successes, and I will grant that there are some, despite my huge misgivings about basically most of the Matt Smith era, his later successes, particularly with Capaldi, I think come when he actually leaves behind all of that stuff and writes a story.
Absolutely, which because as we say, he
season
can
10,
do
for example, which I
do
really
something with heart, and he can do something. Yeah, totally.
I mean, if you think about the relationship, particularly in season 10, between the Dr. Bill and Nardole, that's something that is perhaps speaks to the warmer elements that we've just identified in Blake.
Totally.
And I think that he's often delivering richer television later on when he's going down that route rather than trying to I don't want to say grab at his past glories, but try and relive his past glories.
Well, it's sort of singing the same tunes essentially, isn't it? Like again. I think there's also, I mean, it's a problem that I think is quite inherent to Doctor Who, right? Which is that Doctor Who, it does sort of broadly resets every few years as you get a change of cast, as you get a change of key personnel working on it. But also bearing in mind that it's a show that theoretically has a different location, different vibe, sometimes even a different writer from week to week. It's a show that essentially, I think the process of making Doctor Who is a process of constantly throwing shit against the wall, and some of it will stick and some of it won't. And in
your analogy, what you want is a wall where the shit has stuck.
Well, because
you want a shitty wall.
Well, I think one could argue that was what we got.
I have heard the expression before. It's just I've always wanted to really unpack what are we really here for?
What are we actually saying here? But
I want the shit to very much detach and
but this is the thing. I think of like you. What's the best way to put it? Is that quite the risk of failure with Doctor Who is high, and I think when Doctor Who doesn't fail, there is perhaps a tendency, certainly on behalf of fans and possibly on behalf of people making the show, to go, well, that worked, we should lean into that some more.
Ah, yes.
And that's the thing of like, I do think, I don't know if this is a complete sort of 360 thesis, but I think a lot of the standout episodes of Doctor Who in both eras are the sort of oddball episodes that break the formula a bit. Like this does it, Girl Who Waited we discussed last year, which is very much doing something else compared to what the show normally does. Turn Left as well, and also sort of in the classic series, Deadly Assassin, Genesis of the Daleks, these are all doing things that are not replicable formulas. And yet every time something like that lands, like Genesis lands, it's like, right, okay, well, Davros is going to be our main baddie, diminishing returns. Obviously, we talked when we did, I mean, it's been years since we did Deadly Assassin, but, the legacy of Gallifrey, stories afterwards, it's like it's impossible not to see it through that sort of lens. I would say that the Caves of Androzani, which, I think we both appreciate as a piece of drama, we differ slightly on whether or not that's appropriate for Doctor Who.
In the sense that, just to be clear, I don't think so.
Yes, in that you don't.
And I don't like it as a model.
No, absolutely not. But I think there's definitely something there.
I appreciate its qualities.
Yeah.
I just don't think it should be Doctor Who.
But I think in the way that it worked, at least on its own terms, in a way that a lot of its preceding era had not worked. What you get with the Sixth Doctor era, where it's grim, nihilistic, violence, is very much an attempt to say, right, we should lean into this. And it's sort of hard.
So we're back to Tony Hayers, aren't we? Well, in My Alan Partridge, what is it? It says Morse. He lists all these regional.
Oh yeah. What does that say about regional-based detectives?
Tony Hayers says, well, that there are too many of them. No, people like them. Let's make some more of them. I mean, what I was,
but it's one of those things. I think there's something inherently about Doctor Who that means you have to be very careful about learning from your successes.
Well, I don't think it's only Doctor Who. I think any kind of high concept, long running series, whether it's film or television, can find itself in this particular rut. We were speaking at the weekend about the James Bond films, for example. You have Skyfall, which is a massive breakout success. They go, Skyfall worked, let's make it again.
Yeah.
And so they force poor old what's his face, the director.
Sam Mendes.
Sam Mendes, yes. Storied director Sam Mendes. They force him, they more or less at gunpoint, or certainly with millions of dollars, to come back out and play the old hits again. And you see it again actually with they do The Spy Who Loved Me, and they go, right, that worked. Let's make The Spy Who Loved Me again in space.
Yeah.
Now again, I quite like Moonraker, but the point stands that they're sort of learning the wrong lessons. You might get lucky and be able to flip that coin twice and get heads, but yeah, you don't. It's not a given.
Yeah, but I think that's the thing. I'm very sympathetic. I mean, this came in a good run of episodes at the back end of the season. So you've just had Human Nature and the Family of Blood. Then you've got this. Then you've got Utopia the following week, which is also excellent. And that's a really good run of episodes that this sits.
And Utopia, which I think I totally agree. I like Utopia too. Leads into a universally loved series finale.
But that's the thing. I think in a season,
but you're right. It is a good run.
But
of
in a season where you've if you're looking to say like what were the good bits this season, you're going to say Blink. And you're not necessarily going to say Gridlock, 42, Last of the Time Lords, But
imagine,
but the temptation to
imagine a season of Doctor Who where there's a relatively well-respected middle run, and people really don't like the beginning or the end. It's just.
I thought for a minute you were going to say, imagine a season of Doctor Who written by the guy who wrote 42.
No. I don't have to imagine that. But I was riffing off the fact that the latest series.
Yes.
I don't want to say it's a universal view, but I think there's something of a fan consensus.
Good bits are in the middle.
The middle run of episodes was pretty good. The end was not disastrous, but meh at best. And I think the entry point into the season was considered probably the lowest ebb of that season. You're right. The middle run of episodes in season 3 that we're talking about now, I would say pretty universally respected, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think, it's my sort of final point on this, that like, this is so brilliant. Blink is such a brilliant episode. It's like, I think you could be forgiven for wanting more Doctor Who like that. But for me, at least, a few years down the line, there was a sort of...
you see the cracks in the wall.
Perfect.
If I look with this eye at that eye, look what you get. You see the difference? But it's the same look. And if I keep blinking, it weakens me. But if I'm talking to you and I don't blink and I just keep going and I don't blink and I keep on going and I don't blink, you start to listen to what I'm saying. And it makes me a very strong person.
So we touched on this a little bit in the chat, but it's worth coming back to. The breakout, the Weeping Angels were a breakout monster, breakout villain, which does sort of lead you to think, and I was talking about how it created the kind of proper hiding behind the sofa moment, reminiscent of the early Dalek mania in the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm bumping on being able to think of another such monster or villain from the kind of New Who post 2005 era.
Yeah.
Is that because I am just misremembering, or have we not had that volume of classic villains and monsters? Would you say?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, I think we touched on this briefly last year, but if I was to say, I mean, setting aside, discussions about individual eras of Doctor Who, I think it is a problem that the sort of modern series has kind of a lack of legacy in that regard. And I think it's probably created more memorable characters that have stuck in the public imagination, like Rose, Donna, and it's made some big stars out of people. It's launched people to stardom in the way that the classic series never did. So it's not like you could say that Doctor Who has not left a footprint. But I would also say that there isn't anything really like, I don't know. It's like the Weeping Angels, I think you could potentially argue that it was diminishing returns all the way with their sort of 3 subsequent appearances, twice in the Matt Smith era and then once during the Flux run of Jodie Whittaker episodes. But I don't think that's to say that like they weren't a successful breakout monster, because they're probably the only ones
because they were.
Because they were like, they sold action figures.
Yeah.
There was an office I worked in a few years ago where we had, I don't have no idea why, but we had a giant cardboard cutout of a weeping angel sort of sitting in there, and it was able to support sort of that kind of excitement. And to be honest, people
and recognition,
and people recognise them in the way that people can recognise a Dalek. A lot of people could probably recognise a Cyberman, and I think we definitely talked about this when we did Last of the Time Lords last year, that the sort of, particularly with the passage of time and the sort of accumulation of lore that Doctor Who has built up now over 6 decades, it is easier to buy cheap dramatic impact by bringing back something from the classic series in the modern era, which I would...
Something, of course, that Russell T Davies was criticised for not doing in the latest series.
Well, but then bringing back Sutek, I mean, we weren't like lining up to demand the return for Sutek.
Well, no, we weren't. No, I wasn't.
I don't think anyone was.
But I think But what I'm saying is that he was. I mean, okay, when Sutek was revealed, everyone went, "Oh no!" So there was one, but there was a bit of online gnashing of teeth that there were no, I don't know, Daleks, Cybermen, whatever.
Yeah. Well,
but the fact that bringing back an older villain that delivers you some bang for your buck means kind of. I mean, I just think when you think of classic Doctor Who, and you think of the 60s Doctor Who explosion, you tend, I mean, we don't because we're fans, but I think that in the popular understanding, it's a grainy black and white picture of a Dalek going down a corridor.
Absolutely.
It's not William Hartnell or
like the Beatles,
Troughton or whatever. So, and I just don't think that, and this isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, but you're right. The focus has been much more on the characters, right? So the actors break out from there. Matt Smith, David Tennant, Billy Piper, they break out because of inhabiting those characters rather than there being a big bad. It hasn't really. I mean, I'm struggling to think. Well, which do you think? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Which do you think of the new Who villains should have? You're disappointed that it didn't have more of an impact.
Well, I mean, it's a design question, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's like there was a fair amount of mileage that was got out of the Ood. I think the Ood have been underused within the series, and I think they've definitely got that. But then maybe
they got a bit of the recognition factor as well. Like, I mean, if you want to think of New Who, or like if they do, I don't know, Doctor Who immersive experience in London or something, they'll stick an Ood in the picture, won't they? I mean, I would buy that actually. Yeah, they sort of cut through a bit.
But I think there's also something about the. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's. It's definitely a design question, and the Ood are a brilliant design. But the Daleks and the Weeping Angels they're sort of iconic to look at. I don't know whether it's just that it's hard to get excited about CGI in a way that something that
perhaps
sort of maybe exists in a computer.
I quite like the monks, in the Capaldi era.
Yeah, it's
the
just
kind of shrouded kind of.
I just don't really.
I didn't like the episodes very much,
No.
but I did like the kind of look of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I liked the trick. I liked the chicken shredding aspect of the Vashta Nerada, but of course, cheap to make. Cause
even cheaper than the Angels, I think,
Yes.
in that regard. But then maybe there's also something about like the sort of breakout designs that really work are the ones that maybe aren't necessarily just like person in a boiler suit kind of thing, in the way that obviously the Angels aren't, the Daleks aren't. There's something sort of quite enclosed there. I don't know. It's an interesting question, because also that's the other thing. Like, I'm really struggling to think of a modern series monster, like sort of monster in that sort of like monster, not just like an interesting villain or a character or something that you feel could have. But then maybe it's because the series I think is dramatically over-relied on the Cybermen. I'd be quite happy to never see the Cybermen again in modern Doctor Who.
No, to the extent that they've forgotten what they're really for.
Yeah.
Perhaps with the exception of the end of season 10.
Yeah. But I think it's like basically any time the series needs to go for that sort of impact that might have been previously given over to the creation of a new monster. It's like the impact now comes from like, and would you know it? It was the Daleks, that kind of thing. I don't know. But food for thought. I mean, maybe I'm missing one. And obviously, listeners, viewers, please do write in.
If either of you have got an opinion on this and fancy writing in, please do.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wraps it up for this week.
That about wraps it up. Yep.
I think we're just about finished here, but we will be back next week.
Next week? Wow.
With more Doctor Who to talk about. In the meantime, please get in touch. Obviously, like and subscribe to the show if you're not subscribed already. Leave us a rating on iTunes. If you want to get in touch, you can find us. We're on Blue Sky.
We are.
At I'll Explain Later.
I'll explain
later. We'll check the Twitter once in a while if you want to check
we
us
absolutely
on,
won't. Sorry.
That's I'll look in once in a while.
Ugh.
We're on Twitter and Instagram at Explain Later Pod. We're on YouTube at I'll Explain Later. You can email us hello@I'llExplainLater.com.
I'll explain later.
Get in touch. Drop us an email. Leave a comment underneath this if you're watching on YouTube. And let us know. Let us know which monsters we're missing, the ones that deserve another shake from the modern series.
From the modern series, yeah.
There's got to be one.
There's got to
be one.
We've put ourselves on the spot. I can't even remember any.
I'm just sitting here thinking, I know nothing about Doctor Who.
All that keeps popping into my head is Carvanista. That's the last thing I need. Just sort of space bungle.
What was the sort of, or the thing that treads on the kebab in the first Jodie Whittaker episode. I don't know, what was that? Tim Shaw or something?
Tim Shaw, yeah.
Anyway.
We went to school with someone called Tim Shaw, so that ruined that. Tim, if you're listening, hi.
Yeah. Your view of the Chibnall era might have gone quite differently if you hadn't got off on the wrong foot there.
Right?
Anyway, thanks a lot for joining us. We'll be back next week. Have a good week.
Take care.